You're listening to The Head Trash Show with the founder of Head Trash, Alexia Leachman. Head Trash is the home to the new and unique Head Trash clearance method that removes unwanted negative thoughts, feelings and emotions quickly and effectively so that you can achieve clarity, confidence and contentment in your life. Tune in every week as Alexia shares insights and simple strategies to help you create some headspace to experience confidence and clarity in your life and business. To find out how to clear your head trash quickly and effectively using our unique method, pop over to www.headtrash.co.uk to get our free download and subscribe for our free head trash clearance updates. And now for the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Head Trash Show. This is me, your host, Alexia Leachman, and thank you so much for joining me today. Now, on today's show, we're going to be talking about sleep. Well, it's such a big topic, I really thought it was well worth revisiting. Now, as you might remember, I did cover sleep, or at least insomnia, a few weeks ago when I had Shell Hamilton on the show, who's a hypnotherapist, and she specialises in helping people with insomnia. So if you missed that, then go back and check it out, because her voice for one is completely intoxicating, and she's got some meditation minis that are in the iTunes at the moment, completely free, and she's storming the iTunes charts, so it's well worth checking out her little meditation minis. But yes, I thought it was really worth revisiting this aspect of sleep, because one thing that I certainly feel is that there's lots of reasons why we might not be sleeping well, and one of them is going to be the sleeping environment and some of the more practical sides to it. But there's also going to be a lot of mental stuff, a lot of head stuff going on, and that's what I'm really interested in, obviously. And today's guest is really going to be able to give a really super perspective on that side of things, because her background is as a psychotherapist. Today I've got Keri Nola on the show, and not only has she got a really broad background in terms of psychotherapy, but also energy psychology and lots of other great mindset shifting techniques, but she's also written a book called 44 Holistic Tips for Peaceful Sleep. And if you just read the testimonials for this book, you will realise that getting Keri on the show is an absolute win for me, because she's just got a ton of really great advice to share to help you get really good sleep. Now, because sleep is such a really big topic, I'm not going to stop there. So, of course, today I've got Keri on the show. But in a few weeks' time, I'm also going to do just my own show on sleep, because one thing that I've picked up on with the work that I do with people is the kind of head trash that I think we need to deal with in terms of helping you to get a good night's sleep. And there's also one thing that I think is very rarely talked about is the stress of sleep. So the fact that sleep itself can stress you out. Not only can your life stress you out and stop you from sleeping, but sleep itself can also stress you out. So look out for an episode soon in terms of helping you to understand how sleep can stress you out, but more importantly, how to stop it from stressing you out so that you can get a good night's sleep. So listen out for that, because that will be coming out in a few weeks' time. And I'm also developing an audio session product for people to help them get a better night's sleep. And so if you're interested in finding out more about that, then do get in touch, because I'm going to be looking for some people to test that for me very soon. So if you're interested in finding out more about testing my sleep product, then just send me an email, hello@headtrash.co.uk, with sleep in the title, and I'll put you on the list for people when I'm looking for testers for my sleep product. And that offer only stands for the month of March 2015, because that is when I will be doing the testing. So if you want to get in touch, then do email me then. But the product will be for sale from April onwards. Fingers crossed, at least. Anyhow, so enough of that. Now I'm going to get back to today's show, which is with the wonderful guest, Keri Nola, who's going to share with us some brilliant, peaceful tips or holistic tips for peaceful night's sleep. Over to the time when I spoke to Keri Nola. Okay, so Keri, before we start, just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. I never know where to start with these things. It's like, do I talk about the credentials and training, or do I talk about me and my own journey? So I guess I'll do a combination. I am a soul who's always been seeking to learn more about myself and the world and how it all works and what we're all doing here. And I feel like that really lended itself to exploring psychology and getting my training. I am now a therapist, and I have a healing center in Central Florida here in the U.S., and just really enjoy holding sacred space for people to wake up to the wholeness of who they are and what they're on the planet here to do. And as part of that work, I have written a few books, and I speak and teach both virtually and in person about all kinds of topics around personal growth and spirituality, what we're all doing here, and how we can figure out this thing called life. But yeah, I think I've always been searching, wanting to understand myself and others and how we interact with one another and with ourselves. And every time I'm sitting with another soul doing this work, I'm learning about myself. And to me, it's like a mirror back home into my own experience. And I find that my clients are some of my greatest teachers. So it's kind of twofold. I feel like in a way I agreed to this role before I even got here at some level, and I'm getting a lot out of it as well.
I certainly found that it was my own sort of head trash that brought me on this journey. It was trying to understand my own head, and I was learning all these things primarily for me, and then I kind of feel like I share what I've learned to those that I feel can benefit, that are on a similar journey. Is that sort of how that feels for you? Absolutely.
And I almost feel like, in a way, I don't know if you feel this way, but do you ever meet people and you feel like you almost had like a divine appointment to support one another, or to support? This feels right. Like there's certain people that I just sit with, or certain topics that people come to me for support with, and I don't know exactly where I get the words or how I hold the sacred space, but it just feels right, and it's very natural. Yeah. And so it's not forced or even something that I necessarily learned, although I have a lot of training on paper, but so much of it feels very organic.
No, I totally get what you mean. And what do you find when you're working with people? What do you find are the your favourite approaches or techniques? Have you got a sort of default one that you always go to, or what's your favourite way of working with people?
Intuition comes to mind. My favorite technique is myself, and is opening myself up to things that I can't necessarily see or have evidence of in the physical realm, but I just get a sense, and allowing myself to be led, because I think there really isn't a cookie cutter approach that's going to work with everyone. We're all so dynamic and unique in our own ways, and also similar in a lot of ways too. And I just really like that process to unfold. So I use my intuition, and one of my favorite approaches, it's called parts work. So I like supporting people in embracing all parts of themselves, because I find that we've spent so much of our lives rejecting aspects of ourselves, of our behavior, qualities or characteristics that are unsavory or dark, or that people don't like. Perhaps in our own families, we may have been rejected at times when we expressed anger or sadness. Even if those weren't able to be embraced by our caretakers, we learn that those are parts of us that are not really welcome in our relationships. And so we begin to section them off, and it creates a lot of disharmony internally. And talk about our sleep being affected, it's already coming up here, because that's one of the ways when we're not in whole connection with ourselves, we can't be in whole connection with the world, and our sleep is one of the ways that those parts of us try to get our attention. And that is really, I would say, the premise of my work. And then I work intuitively with parts of each person that I'm with to help them understand, meet, and discover what the needs are of those parts and why they've been screaming for their attention through these bothersome symptoms.
I find that you do a lot of work with helping people to sort of reveal their authenticity, don't you? And I wonder, yes, for you, what do you think are the main barriers or things that stop people from really connecting to who they are? What have you come across as being the main sort of causes for that for people?
Yeah, for me, I see fear as really, and we're all afraid of something different in a way. We might vocalize our fear differently, but I think at the core, it's being terrified of not being accepted for who we are. And whether that be, from experiences we've had with people who, when we were being who we were, it just wasn't acceptable, or we didn't feel like we were able to belong or be embraced. And a lot of times well-meaning parents and caregivers who haven't learned to embrace their own authenticity have a hard time being able to do that for their children. And so I say children are great observers, but we're not the best interpreters at that phase of our life. We think everything is about us. So we begin to internalize these messages of I'm not enough. When I am the fullness of who I am, that's not acceptable and I can't be loved or belong. So we begin to collect these masks and costumes that we then wear in the world. And over time, that gets incredibly heavy, and it manifests in the symptoms that we experience as depression, anxiety, and even disease in a lot of different ways in our physical body too.
So just thinking about sleep then, you mentioned how some of those feelings really start contributing to sleep problems. Where do you see the link? What kind of fears or emotions do you think are contributing to problems with sleep then?
I think there's many of them, and really I love your term head trash, that there are all of these things that we've collected that are flying around our headspace, and it makes it really challenging to rest. And part of it is when we're having chaos or unrest in our life, that is in our energy field, and so it's going to show up in our patterns of sleep, because we can't sleep if we're not relaxed or rested or in a state of peace. And I think a lot of times our lack of sleep or ability to feel restful is really a metaphor for other things that are going on in our lives, other areas of chaos or disharmony or imbalance. And then when we try to find rest at night, it's not there, because it's not there in our life. And it's just one more place where it's trying to get our attention and to wake us up. I think it's so interesting, and I talk about in my book, one of the questions to ask ourselves is, what is it that my lack of sleep is trying to wake me up to, that I've been asleep to in my life?
I love that. I love that. I just got tingles when you said that. And it's so true. The idea that we just need to wake up and smell the coffee when it comes to our own lives.
Yes. And I think that is the journey that we're all on, is waking up to the true essence of who we are. And when we're asleep to that, I think we spend a lot of time rejecting our symptoms. We're angry that we can't sleep. And all of that is fine and beautiful. It's not that you're not supposed to be angry. And when we can also bring in some gratitude and that these symptoms are really our teachers, and when we're willing to show up to the classroom and be a student to whatever's showing up, we have so much more power and control over our ability to make changes and to welcome more peace and comfort into the experience that we have. It's like we're so desperate for it to go away, it has to keep showing up because we haven't yet learned what it's come to teach us or get our attention about.
Absolutely. And until we sort of do show up to listen and to take note, it is just going to keep on knocking louder and louder until it becomes quite a serious issue in our lives, and could manifest physically within our bodies as well. So now I'm just thinking, with sleep, there are so many different types of sleep problems that people experience. There are those that maybe have the whirring mind that just won't sort of stop thinking, and then there are those that maybe that wake up too early or wake up in the middle of the night and can't go back to sleep. Do you see a distinction or a link between maybe some of the things that are going on in people's lives, or the emotions that need healing, for want of a better word, and the sleep, sort of how that manifests in different sleep disruptions?
I love that. And I'm constantly looking for connections. And one of the things that just came up, I don't know that I've thought of that specifically or found any specific links before. I think for a lot of people it's different. One of the things that's coming up right now asking me that, though, is sometimes we can, for those of us that can fall asleep but we find ourselves waking up or unable to stay asleep, I would wonder about our denial of our worrying. So it's almost like we're able to fall asleep and almost pretend as though we're not worrying. But once our mind rests and our unconscious mind takes over, it's like then we wake up and we remember, okay, I have this worry, I have these things floating around in my headspace, and I'm not able to stay asleep. Whereas people who are kind of more awake to their worries and they have that anxious energy, I find that they have a hard time even falling asleep.
Yeah.
So that's one, I think, connection that I would say I've noticed.
Yeah, no, that seems and also there are those that find it hard to fall asleep might sort of medicate in some way, whether it's having an alcoholic drink before going to sleep, or, you know, sort of drugging out on things like TV, or, you know, all those sort of mental distraction things that kind of really exhaust the mind in some way to maybe get them to sleep, but actually that just doesn't stick, it doesn't stay. And so, like you say, then they'll wake up later. So maybe, yeah, like you say, those that are maybe in denial, they manage to get themselves to sleep in the first place, but the body's not going to take that lying down, as it were. It's going to wake them up later. Like, hey, you've got an issue here. I'm not going to let you get away with that.
It sure will. It will knock, like you said. And first it whispers, and then it starts to talk loudly, and then it will be yelling until we finally are willing to give ourselves that gift of really showing up. I think so much of this is really, we learn in our cultures to abandon ourselves at every turn, to whether it be to be there more for others than we are for ourselves, or whether it just be such a deep fear of sitting with uncomfortable feelings and experiences and realities that we're constantly abandoning ourselves. And so our body has that tough job of reminding us to come back home. And with symptoms like trouble sleeping or even pain and all kinds of things, it's an invitation to come home. But it's even harder, I think, for us to be willing to come home when we're having those experiences. So it really is a dance of how willing am I to be present with myself and to show up for myself over and over again. Because that's the thing also, I don't think that there's any one technique or approach that resolves this for life. It's like you wake up every day, and just because you ate yesterday doesn't mean you don't need to eat again today. It's just because you got some sleep resolution last week, last month, it doesn't mean that your body is not going to ask for your time, love, and attention about that again tomorrow or next week or the month after. And when you can look at it from a more empowering perspective, I think we stop being at war with our struggles with sleep, and we begin to embrace. And at least I found that for myself with the difficulties I've had with myself and sleep, and also as I support other people. As soon as we are resisting it and at war, it becomes very difficult to partner with and to get any resolution that feels good.
Yeah, and I certainly have views about the idea that sleep itself is stressful, the very idea of trying to get to sleep, and then when you don't get to sleep, you start almost sort of feeling really stressed by the fact that you're not sleeping, and then it's that stress that almost makes the whole situation a whole lot worse. And if you didn't get stressed by the lack of sleep in the first place, you'd probably fall asleep much quicker, you know. And then also those people that maybe get really, that they need it to be perfect, they need it to be quiet, they need it to be silent. And the minute there's a tiny little noise, they use that as the excuse why they're not sleeping. They'll hook onto that mentally. And so there's all these distractions that prevent us from sleeping that people maybe hold on to. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? And I think
it does.
And I let go of that noise. Yes, I can hear the noise of those people in the street. Well, I'm not going to allow them to stop me from sleeping, because, you know, it's possible to sleep through all that kind of noise. We just, for some reason, mentally, we're choosing not to on some crazy level. So maybe making peace with, like you just said, like making peace with the aspects of sleep, so you don't resist it as much and allow it to come into your life.
Yes, and I wonder at some level too how it's a self-punishment. I don't deserve rest, or I can't rest. There's also a lot of fear around resting. You know, sleeping is probably one of our most vulnerable states. If you think about it, when we're asleep, the world is happening, people can come and go, you know, and that can be a very vulnerable state. And especially for those of us with any trauma in our history or any experience around vulnerability, I think sometimes there needs to be some work and some support with parts of us that don't feel safe in that level of vulnerability. And so as you talk about allowing distractions to be an excuse and all of that, I think sometimes we're not even aware of why we're so easily distracted, or we're hyper vigilant to these external noises. I think that's an important piece to ask ourselves attention to, and then to set our sleep space up so that we feel safe in it. We have a sanctuary to rest in that allows us to feel safe and secure.
Now, before we dive into the tips, I do want to get onto some really juicy tips in a bit, but I just had another thing that came to me, and that's when I spent some time working a lot in the corporate space recently, and the problem seems really quite acute within that environment, you know, where you've got people that are really stressed, working really hard and long hours, and those people that maybe have a lot on their plate at work where they really can't even get that done during a normal working day, they have really, you know, I was really hearing from a lot of people that really struggle to get to sleep. Why do you think that might be so much the case within that kind of heavy stress working environment?
Yeah, I think in my experience, that is really about the level of the body has to be at peace and in rest in order to sleep. And it's hard to get to that space when we are so in hyperactive mode throughout the day. And so also it's like for people who exercise right before bed, or people who are just working, and then expect to come home, eat something, and go right to bed. That's not really how we were designed. There is this time frame of rest that is meant to happen. And if over time we're not honoring that natural cycle or season of our body, then it manifests in these struggles with sleep, for sure. I also think there's a fear of knowing that we have to get up again to repeat that same thing in the morning. And so, like you were talking about, part of how are we talking to ourselves about that? Like, oh my gosh, I only have in 4 more hours, I have to get up and I got to do this all over again. And even if we're not consciously aware of that anxious state of thinking, it's playing on a tape behind the scenes, and our body responds to that. I know for me, when I started structuring my schedule in a way where I wasn't working an 8 to 5 schedule anymore, I didn't have to be up at that hour. It really allowed my body to follow its natural rhythms. And now when I wake up at 4 in the morning, I'm not terrified that I only have 2 more hours to rest before I have to race up in the morning. I'm like, it's okay for me to be with whatever woke me up, and to know that I'll be able to rest later. And I know that not everyone chooses a schedule that allows for that, but what I'm talking about here is really how we're thinking about what we're experiencing and how we're talking to ourselves about it. And one of the tips in the book that I talk about is creating healthy affirmations and mantras around our sleep patterns, because so often we align with the not getting enough sleep. So we might even talk to other people about it. You might say, gosh, I'm just a terrible sleeper. I never get any sleep. I can't sleep. And all of these things then align us with the vibration of not being able to sleep. So we want the opposite of that, yet that's not really what we're setting ourselves up for with that kind of languaging. And at the same time, if that's true, it's fine to talk about those realities, but you can also start bringing in some other things that you want to be. I'm curious about my ability to get some peaceful rest tonight. I wonder when, I'll be willing to welcome that for myself. So we welcome this energy of curiosity and wondering so that we can birth something new in the space that we want to have come.
Certainly when you were saying the whole idea of the sooner you go to sleep, the sooner you'll have to revisit the nightmare day that you know is awaiting you the next day. That resonates so much with me. I used to love staying up late, really, really late, because I knew the minute I went to sleep, it just meant that within a snapshot, I'd be waking up to my reality, which I didn't want to be living. And so, I can totally understand how those people do not, on some level, want to go to sleep, because it just brings them closer to the day they have ahead of them, which they maybe don't want to be living,
Yes, and like we're talking about sleep being a teacher or a metaphor for what we're not awake to in our lives. If we are keeping ourselves stuck in unfulfilling relationships or work situations, I think those two are primarily, and then money, I think, also comes up. Our financial fears keep us up a lot too. So if any of those areas are not getting the attention, and we're forcing ourselves to do something or maintain a status quo that doesn't resonate with us, our body is going to call for our attention around that. So something even as simple as, I realize I'm not happy in this job, but I'm not a victim of the job. I'm choosing to hold this in my reality right now, and that's okay. But a lot of victim mentality, feeling stuck in relationships, stuck in jobs, stuck in realities that truly are our choice, not something we're forced to be doing, that is a level of empowerment that can bring a whole new kind of rest, because we're telling ourselves the truth. Our mind and body resonate with truth. And it's hard to be restful when we're lying. If we keep BSing and telling ourselves this story that, XYZ, or I'm happy when I'm really not, or, I hate my job and it's not my fault, my boss is doing it to me, these kind of things don't lend themselves to an empowered state of being.
So moving on to tips, because I know that, we can talk about the whys and wherefores, why we're not getting sleep, but I'm sure what my listeners really want to know is, how do I get some sleep? So from your book, you've got a book out called 44 Holistic Sleep Tips, is that right? Could you share us a few for my listeners from your book?
Absolutely. So I talk about some of the traditional ones that many of us might be familiar with, and that's things like being aware of your sleep space and making sure to declutter it, because it's really an external representation of what's going on internally. So if we can declutter our space, it helps to clear the energy to welcome more peaceful sleep. Also things like taking electronics out of the space. And you mentioned earlier, Alexia, watching TV before bed, or even playing computer games or any kind of light. Darkness triggers chemicals in our brain that welcome tiredness and sleep. So a lot of times we're kind of working against our biology with all of these newer technologies that we have that we didn't have back in the day. So taking your TV out of your sleep space, for example, and going into your sleep space and doing something in the dark that helps you to begin to adjust and tell your mind that it is time for rest is one of the kind of more traditional tips. And so I have some of those. But what I'd like to talk about are some of the things you might not have heard or thought about, because that's really my sweet spot, is talking about holistic things that we might not necessarily think of. And one of my favorites is, I never go to bed without taking a shower. But it's not just a shower to clean my body. Actually, I'm not even thinking about that. It's an intentional bath or shower that is actually a ritual where I envision rinsing off anything from my day that isn't going to support my peaceful sleep. And literally, I think through my day, a movie of my day, from the frustrating traffic in the morning maybe, or a discussion I had with my boss or my partner, or something that happened with the kids. And I just allow any of that that's not going to serve my peaceful sleep to go down the drain, and to allow the water to support me in becoming more balanced and more free from those things, acknowledging that they're over and that I survived them, and that I don't need to take them to bed with me.
That's a nice one. I like that.
The other thing that I love are sleep rituals. And one of my favorites, I keep this, I actually did this every night for about, 3 or 6 months. It was a very regular ritual for me. And I call it my burden basket. And it's literally a basket that I have on my nightstand. And next to it, I have a jar of rocks. And I take one rock and allow it to hold a burden that I name the burden. So, I didn't get the raise, or, my idea wasn't accepted at the meeting, or, I was late for something, I missed my child's soccer game or important event. Whatever burdens that we seem to be carrying still at the end of the day, I allow the rocks to hold them for me. And it's nice because the rocks have a weight to them, and they also have different sizes and shapes and feels. And I really, it's almost like a meditation where I just invite the rock to hold that for me, and I place it in the basket. And then at the end of the week, I look at all of those burdens that I've carried, and that the basket and Mother Nature really have helped to support me in carrying and holding. And then I empty them, and I start fresh with a clean slate and ready to have it help me hold some new burdens that will collect in the week ahead.
Do you use new rocks, or do you clean them in some way, or?
Yeah, I am very connected to the moon cycles. So at the new moon or full moon cycles, I'll put the rocks outside and allow them to be recharged and kind of regenerated with some fresh energy from Mother Nature. Also, sea salt can be a great cleanser. Sometimes the rocks to me, the rocks are like a living being energy. So sometimes they want to be rinsed in water. You can also use crystals for this if you are connected to healing crystals. Many of them have different properties and abilities to hold things for us. I also keep and recommend clear quartz crystal in all corners of the room, including under and around the bed, because these crystals have the ability to ionize negative energy and to absorb things that energetically are around that we might not even consciously be aware of or paying attention to. If we have an argument, let's say, in our house or in our room, or we're talking on the phone, and there is this energy that's unresolved from this experience, it's in our space. And even though we can't see it, or we might not still be thinking about it, our body knows that it's there. So to set up support systems for those things in advance can be very helpful as well.
I like that, Rockwood. I think it's a really nice way of externalizing that burden, and then the act of putting it in the basket is very powerful. That's a very powerful metaphor for getting rid of taking things off your mind. That's really, really great one, that one. Very simple.
Yes, and I think sometimes for any of you listening thinking, really, I'm going to play with rocks before bed, like I feel like at some level when I thought of that idea, I was like, this is kind of childlike. I don't know if this really is going to work. And I just gave myself permission to try it. And that's, I think, what I would recommend as you're hearing us talk about these things. To me, some of these things resonate and maybe they don't. And that's why the book is 44 tips. So some combination of these tips are going to resonate with you. Not all of them, but some of them. Be aware of the part of you that might sabotage your success with sleep by scoffing at or rolling your eyes at recommendations people might offer you, because sometimes that sneaky little part of us that doesn't want to sleep for whatever reason or is afraid of sleep will come up with a lot of excuses or reasons not to try or not to allow support from different things. So I just like to give that disclaimer, because I think that comes up for all of us. Our ego is very, very powerful and has a lot of reasons why certain things won't work for us. So giving permission.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I like doing when I can't sleep is using the technique that I share, which is the head trash clearance technique. And whatever's stopping me from sleeping, I just take that and I work on clearing that. And I did a huge bout of that last night. In fact, I worked so much, I ended up spending an hour doing some, and went to bed much later than I wanted to, because I really needed to get this out of my head. I really needed to clear it and neutralize it. But my goodness, I had such a good night's sleep after that. I just slept so well, because I'd externalized it, I'd neutralized it, I'd got rid of it. And, I think sometimes some of those practices we do, like meditation or whatever, like mantras, whatever it is that is your thing, your practice, maybe using that moment before sleep is also a good time to maybe think about doing those, because you can do those in the dark. Like you mentioned, they're sort of things that you can do in the dark and start winding your body down.
Yes, and I love the results you got with that, and how you even mentioned what caught me about that was it took me a little longer to get to sleep because I spent an hour with myself on this, but yet it was worth it and I think that's part of it, is like we're so rushed. I got to get to sleep by 11. I got to get to sleep. I got to get up so early. We create this rush before bed that then we're not in a restful state to actually welcome sleep. So even though it took a little longer to get to sleep, you benefited from that compassion you gave yourself in that extra time and showing up. And that's another thing I talked earlier about parts work, and it's kind of circling back around to that now. Another ritual that I do is I call it the I've got you technique. And it's where I place the palms of my hand, one on my heart center and one on my belly. And it's almost like we would hold a little child and rock them. It's like, I've got you. Like, I see you, I hear you. And we begin to welcome the parts of us that we may have ignored throughout the day to talk to us. So sometimes when I'm busy and I'm working, I might have sadness come up, or I may have my feelings hurt from something that someone says or does, but yet I don't give it attention. I don't voice it. I don't share it, either within myself or within my relationships. And those things are with us. Our hurt from earlier doesn't just go away. It still wants to be acknowledged and heard. So it will either interrupt our sleep, or we can choose to let it know that I've got you. And what is it that you need me to hear that I missed today? And yes, I remember that moment when you heard, so-and-so say that, and how it hurt your feelings. And I'm really glad you're telling me about that right now. Thank you. And what do you need from me as your nurturing parent to support you so that you can rest tonight, even though that happened today? It has been another very powerful technique for me.
And that's a really big that's a big thing within sort of self-love and self-nurturing, which I think not enough people do love themselves or show themselves love in that way. So that's really powerful on that level as well, isn't it, that one?
Yes. And so much of this is really about that. And I think part of me always almost gets concerned when I talk about this. Like, people are like, wow, this may be not what I was expecting to hear about with sleep. I wanted these very strategic strategies or something. But to me, it really is about falling in love with ourselves. I really think the only problem that exists with any human being is forgetting the divine perfection that we are. And that forgetting manifests in all of the different physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual so-called problems that we have. So the only real solution to getting relief from any problem in our life is to remember that we're okay and we're perfect the way that we are, and we're allowed to live at peace without judging ourselves for these different things that are or aren't happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. So have you got any more tips to share from your book?
Another physical one that is also an energy technique it has to do with the placement of our hands in a different way, but similar to what I just mentioned. And it's one palm on the forehead and one palm at the base of the neck. Okay. And so it's, I think it's called, TAT.
Oh, that's the position we use in the head trash clearance technique. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, it's really related to that, where it activates and supports several acupressure points that relax us and that calm us down. And there's just something, and before I do it, what I like to do too is rub the palms of my hands together for a moment or two and allow some warmth in. And you can place the hands over the eyes to just warm them up. And it also creates that darkness and sends those signals that it's time for rest and it's dark. And then also rubbing the hands together and then placing them in those positions. So that's kind of simultaneous. We have that physical comfort and soothing, which can help to relax the body. And then we also have the energetic component, because we are activating and accessing acupressure points that are meant to support us in relaxation. If you think about it, like when you are with someone who's really upset, for example, do you ever notice how we put our hands to our face?
Yeah. Absolutely.
When we're really upset, that is a natural, our inner knowing that helps to calm us down. And because there are points there that help that to happen.
And so are there, there are a lot of techniques that we hear about that are meant to help us go to sleep. A common one is the lavender essential oil and putting it on your pillow and things like that. Do you think things like that work? Or is it more the internal piece?
I think it's really a combination, and I think there are external tools and resources that can support us. I think sometimes we're just too reliant on those and we forget what we have inside of us. So to me, the most powerful approach is a combination of internal and external support, and remembering that we are really here to supervise the process of selecting external resources that really resonate with us. So in the book, I also talk about essential oils. I also talk about herbal infusions, different teas and things that can support us. And I think all of that is wonderful. And you can really find a combination of these inner and outer support systems that are going to be the perfect fit for you. And the other thing I think too is logging what you've tried, what works, what doesn't. In the book, I have reflection sections after each chapter with different techniques, and it allows you to log, which ones you've tried, and if you're having more, less, or about the same level of peace in your sleep. And that way you kind of have a guide to go back to, because it's really easy to forget, especially when we're having a hard time sleeping. We forget what we've tried, we forget what works, we're just so frustrated and overwhelmed, and we just want to sleep. So that's a way to really support ourselves and have a guide and resource to go back to, like, okay, this worked last time I had a really hard time or sleep period difficulty. Let me try that again.
And I guess now with the changes in things like the Apple app, the health app, there's so many things out there now can help us track our sleep. So we can almost log and see for sure which things are working for us, and then almost devise our own little personal ritual that includes all the things that we found that work. And I guess also when you've talked about the ritual, the rituals that you having the shower, using your rocks, Actually, it's about another thing you mentioned is creating that space. So I guess, if you choose to believe that lavender will help you get to sleep, and it's all part of your lovely ritual of centering yourself, then it will help you, and that's because you're allowing it to and giving it permission for you to. And so you can devise your own little, creating your space in your home and in your mind to get ready for sleep. So I guess you can blend a lot of these to find the stuff that really works for you, can't you?
Yes, and the permission is one of my favorite words. I love that you brought that up. And it is true that when we give permission for something to work, that it empowers it. It's like putting gas on a fire. It just allows it to blossom and to really take shape. And I think it's also okay for our doubts to be there. I'm not a fan of using affirmations to try to trick ourselves into believing something we don't already believe. I have a process that I call evolutionary affirmations, and those are designed to meet you where you are. So you don't say, I'm a great sleeper, I sleep well every night, because you're thinking to yourself, that's total crap. I don't even believe that. It's not even true. So what you might say is, I am willing to learn how to have more peaceful sleep. I am learning how to have more peaceful sleep. I have welcomed more peaceful sleep in this last month than I have in the last year. You choose statements that actually, when you take a breath and sit with them, they feel true. Because if you try to, it actually creates more internal discord and conflict if you try to choose an affirmation that most parts of you are like, that's not even true. We're not stupid, so we need to work with the parts of us that are doubtful and honor them as part of the process and give their voice permission to coexist with our hopes of what we're willing to try and open to having success with.
I know one thing that I sort of had a bit of a realisation once when I was struggling with sleep, and I had this obsession that I needed 8 hours a night, and so I decided that I didn't need 8 hours a night anymore, and that actually 5 or 6 was perfectly adequate, because I realised I was lying in bed saying to myself, oh my goodness, I've only got 6 hours left and I need 8, and this is going to be awful, I'm going to be so tired tomorrow, all this terrible negative self-talk. I am going to be so tired tomorrow because I won't have enough sleep. These are like, what kind of order is that for my mind and body to obey? I was constantly saying that kind of stuff. So now when I'm still awake at 2 and I know I'm going to be woken up at 7 or whatever, I just say, hey, I only need 5 anyway, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be so fresh tomorrow. I don't need all that sleep. I'm going to be so fresh. Even with 5 hours sleep, I'm going to be so fresh. And just by changing what I was saying to myself, as I was trying to go to sleep, completely transformed how I felt the next morning when I woke up, and I really did feel fresh. And I thought, hang on a minute, is this working? And it does work. It sounds silly, doesn't it? But that stuff works.
It sure does. And that reminds me of like a lot of authors, in particular spiritual authors, will talk about waking up spontaneously at like 3 or 4 in the morning and just, instead of going back to sleep, they choose to put their feet on the ground and to allow themselves to begin writing. There's also a spiritual idea that the veils between the physical realm and the spiritual realm are very thin between 3 and 5 in the morning. And sometimes we're awakened by our soul because we don't need sleep moment. It's time to be awake, and it's time to birth a new idea or a project or something. So I love that you just said that, Alexia, because this story that we need 8 hours of sleep, we don't always. And to me, we can't need something we don't have. It's fighting with reality, and it creates more war and resistance. One of my favorite teachers, Byron Katie, talks about that all the time. And when we learn to fall in love with our reality and to get curious about, gosh, why am I up right now? What wants to come to me right now? Rather than try to force ourselves to go back to sleep, it becomes a little bit more compassionate and gentle. And I've experimented with that myself, and I've birthed some incredible projects and ideas. The 2 favorite times when my big ideas come are either in the shower or when I wake up in the middle of the night and I allow myself to be with the quiet and stillness of the world.
I totally get
at that moment. All time.
I've woken up so many times like that in the middle of the night, and I've just had to, and then I had to go against what I know, which is get my phone out, get that silly screen in my face, which I know is not going to help, but just so I can get my ideas down, because I just get so many ideas that come to me. I wake up, have so many ideas, write them down, and then I can go back to sleep. And then in the morning, when I actually get around to do my work, I've got all this meat to work with that came to me in the night, that if I didn't capture it there. I'd be sitting in my office just sort of staring, trying to grasp at this inspiration that wasn't coming, and yet it comes to me at night, So now I've learned to appreciate and be grateful when I get woken up like that, because I just open my mind up to, hey, hang on, there's something about to come. I'm downloading. I just need to wait until I know what it is, and I'll write it down. So I've changed my perspective in when I wake up in the night now.
For sure. And I keep a download pad next to my bed, because sometimes, like you mentioned, that phone light can bother me if my body wants to go to bed after the download. And it's hilarious to look at it in the morning, because half the time I'm writing with my eyes closed or in the dark, and it's like running off the page and the letters are all, but I get it. And that's another tip wants to be shared. So I'm just going to let it fly here, is allowing yourself to write down what comes to you either before bed or when you wake up. If something's circling in your mind, writing it down, because sometimes our unconscious mind is afraid that we're going to forget about that in the morning. So it has to loop and loop and loop. And if we write it down and we tell ourselves, hey, I wrote this down, so thank you so much for reminding me, but we don't have to keep playing that on loop, because now we have it here, and in the morning it's going to be here, so I won't forget it, and I'll be able to pay it attention and mind when I wake up. But right now, I'd appreciate being able to get back to sleep. And that's enough. It's powerful how when we just give something our attention, it's served its purpose, and it knows that we saw it and heard it, and it can relax and rest now. So that pad beside my bed plays a lot of roles, and it's interesting too to go back and to see what the themes are and patterns of what did I get up in the middle of the night worrying about, and what kind of downloads am I getting, and what types of things am I dumping from my brain before I go to bed. That journal, the bedtime journal, almost becomes a real resource for us to see what it is that's been going on and what those themes are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking that the side of your bed must look quite cluttered with all your things going on.
It's really the only place that has clutter. I have my crystals and my cup of water and and my pad, and I don't have an alarm clock, or sometimes I do charge my phone there, but I've really begun to remove electronics, which my sleep patterns have appreciated. So I do have a lot of resources, though.
No, I've got loads of
my bed. You're right.
I've had to get a bedside cabinet with 2 drawers in, because I've got all my stuff that I might need when I wake up in the middle of the night, or all my little things that help me to get to sleep. So I totally get having all these little tools by our bed, because sleep's such an important thing. But listen, Keri, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on the show. It's been brilliant. You've shared some amazing tips, and I will definitely be getting hold of your book. I really wanted to read it before our chat today, but my little newborn had other ideas when she was teething last night, so I didn't get the chance to buy it and read it in time. But thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom around sleep, and much, much more, actually. Much, much more. Thank you.
You're so welcome. I loved our candid conversation and just going back and forth, and I trust that it's going to be a wonderful resource for everyone that listens.
Now, before you go, do tell us where we can find out more about you. Tell us exactly what the title of your book is, and what your websites and all your social media stuff and all that stuff. Just tell us where we can find you.
Absolutely. So the book is called 44 Holistic Tips for Peaceful Sleep, and it's available on Amazon. So you're welcome to go there and type that in and check it out to see if it resonates with you. It's on Kindle and in paperback form, so lots of choices. Gosh, I have several. I have a couple websites. The website that I'm really nurturing the most right now is kerinola.com, and that is where I support spiritual and healing entrepreneurs in working through the ways that they might be sabotaging themselves from bringing their messages and work to the world. And I've got a lot of free resources on my blog there about how we can stay awake to what we're on the planet to do. And have a Facebook community. It's facebook.com/path to growth. I share daily inspirations, and we have some great conversation over there as well. And on Twitter, I'm at Path to Growth, which is my business name. And I'd love for you guys to connect and let me know you found me from the Head Trash Show.
Well, thank you so much, Keri. Thank you for coming on, and we'll be sure to come and I'm going to put all those links within the blog post for this episode. So if you've not managed to get them just now, then just head over to the headtrash.co.uk website, and they'll be all under the episode with Keri Nola. Thank you so much, Keri, for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in. You've just been listening to Alexia Leachman here on The Head Trash Show. If you enjoyed the show, she'd really appreciate you leaving a review on iTunes. And don't forget to pop over to www.headtrash.co.uk to get your copy of the free 5 Steps to Clearing Head Trash guide. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes for more strategies, tips and how-tos for clearing your head trash and reclaiming your headspace. Until next time.